Hello and welcome to the second iteration of Genius League Smart Bytes powered by HPE. I'm Austin Oliver, Junior Data Scientist at Evil Geniuses, and will be your host for the Data Behind the League conversation this evening. I'd like to welcome our two special guests, EG's Director of Athletics for MOBA, Andrew Barton, and Head of Coaching Staff, Kelsey Moser. Welcome, Andrew and Kelsey.
Thanks for having us.
Woo!
Nice to be here, always.
Yeah. I know a lot of people are super excited to hear about the LCS offseason, want to hear more about the coaching staff changes and a little bit more about the roster and our pickups. But I first want to spend some time going into how you both got to where you are today. So first, Andrew, you previously worked for the Houston Rockets. How did that opportunity come about, and how did that transform or shift into an opportunity in the LCS ecosystem?
Yeah, so I started off my career doing corporate finance at a company called Landry's, and then that company actually ended up acquiring the Houston Rockets. And so I ended up transferring over to the Rockets when, hearing about this whole esports, clutch gaming, and the LCS coming about. And so I really got to spend a lot of time with the back office and front office staff at the Rockets, kind of learning from them, their take on the real sports world, and then what their thoughts were going into esports. And so, I started off really just as a team manager role within Clutch Gaming, as an analyst a little bit, and then really grew my way up that ladder, going up to assistant GM finally. And really just starting from the bottom floor, but, learning from the Rockets and all the expertise that, their front and back office staff have at all levels was really extremely helpful, and just combining two worlds together.
Yeah, definitely sounds super interesting. I used to be finance, graduated in finance, so that's really cool. I was curious, what is some of the biggest challenges in shifting from a traditional sports role into an esports role, and then how did the staff at the Houston Rockets really help you grow into a general manager role?
Yeah, I think really back then, learning from Daryl Morey, Sebastian Park, huge analytics guys, and I think that really helped me, helped take that to the LCS and kind of applying what we saw in the NBA and making theories and assumptions about how to work with players. I think, my biggest takeaway actually from the traditional sports world was learning what coaches do at the professional level, and I think so much of that came down to actually personnel management, and that was something I've really prided myself on, and bring that to the LCS, because I think when I got to the LCS in 2018, it was vastly different than either working at a corporation or even at the Rockets. And I think with the influx of money the LCS has seen, and even esports in general, not only staff, players, coaches, whatever you want to call it, we all have to level up in that. And so being able to take that experience from, the Rockets, Landry's, and elsewhere, was super great for me. And just, I think it really helped level up not only the organization, but, even players and staff along the way, because, as more money keeps coming in, we really have to up level not only our operations, but even our competitive performance in order to, keep that money flowing in.
Yeah, definitely. You said a lot of stuff there. I really want to dive into the analytics, the players, and you talked about coaching stuff too. But we'll do that in a bit. Kelsey, you've been around the League of Legends pro scene for a while now in several different types of roles. Journalist, data analyst, content creator. You are the LCS Academy director as well as a head coach for LCS Academy. What was it like moving through all these roles, and how did you end up here?
So I think a lot of people see these roles and kind of wonder what they fit together, but I think seeing the ecosystem from a bunch of different perspectives really helps me understand fully kind of what is the product side of an esports organization, as well as what is a product side of a league. What do fans think? What do players think? What do coaches think? All of those things I think are really helpful in terms of basically viewing esports more comprehensively and viewing my role within a team more comprehensively. So I think that's something that kind of traces across all of them. Like, you could argue being a journalist or being someone who analyzed a lot of foreign leagues, gave me a lot of practice, watching high level VODs, really analyzing and dissecting and being able to articulate my thoughts on high level strategies. and then going in and working like in a more managerial role on a broadcast, for example, managing multiple people on a broadcast helped me with management that can be carried over into like coaching staff management, etc., because you're having to keep track of a lot of different meetings, a lot of different schedules. And pretty much in all of my roles, except for maybe like the journalist role that I've had, I've been very, very focused on making the people around me look better or look stronger or improve. So that's kind of what I'm really focused on now, looking at coaches going into this new position.
Yeah, super interesting. I didn't even mention that you were just the LCS Academy producer. So I'm curious, what was that like, and how was that different than any of the other roles that you had stepped into previously? Or was it? I know you had like just talked about how there were a lot of similarities, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think like I obviously very much enjoy coaching, and that element of my career and that aspect of it. So I kind of translated some of that into how I was working with individual talents and on-air broadcast talent, and setting up a system for them to kind of advance. So it went from coaching academy to coaching like academy on-air talent is kind of like how I thought of it in my head. So a lot of it was like this, where I would give a lot of feedback from that perspective. But I also had it's very interesting because it was a small project that doesn't have as much visibility as LCS, and the goal was to basically grow that project. And I was the only producer on it, so we could basically do whatever we wanted as long as like we stuck to a certain broadcast schedule, right? So there's a lot of freedom and flexibility. I had my hand in a lot of different pies, and it was fun to be able to say like at the end of it that we doubled viewership on the product like year over year. So uh, that was a great role, and I really enjoyed it because it made me keep track of like a bunch of different things at the same time, and improve my managerial skills as well as like a different way to think about, I guess, talent development in any field. So yeah.
Yeah, the Academy broadcast was amazing. We actually worked with a couple of the Academy casters too on like the Factor side. So shout out to Kobe and Joshi if you're watching right now. But yeah, amazing content last year, but excited to have you back at EG. I don't want to put you on the spot, so it depends on, you could answer this however you want, but do you have a favorite role out of the ones that you've gone through besides the one at EG? I know that you could
Obviously,
probably say that one. Yeah.
besides my two jobs that I worked at EG,
Yeah.
clearly. So I probably that one was my favorite, the Academy broadcast producer role, just because again it was a lot of different like skills kind of came together under one umbrella. Working a little bit on my content producer side that I did kind of with journalism, working a little bit on the coaching side, as well as like really talking about content and how to break down things, and having conversations about like how players play the game and things like that. So
Yeah, amazing. Andrew, I do want to go back to you for this. You've also slightly shifted roles somewhat recently. You previously entered EG as general manager of LCS and then have shifted to be director of athletics for MOBA. How was that different from what you were doing previously, and how did you evolve and move into that role?
I think for me specifically moving into this role, it's kind of about, taking a much more macro approach to a lot of our titles. And so, whether that is Valorant, Dota, League of Legends, or even Rocket League, it's, for me about thinking about how, we can better progress in these titles, whether that's, through our players, through our coaching staffs, and just thinking about how, we see that year over year improvement. And so, for me in this role, what is most important is that I am seeing year over year improvement in all of our titles. And that's something I stand pretty strongly by. And so, going back to like the difference in the roles, there's not a massive difference, but I think in this new role, I am trying to take a much more macro perspective when thinking about all of my respective titles and, where to allocate my resources properly. And I think, a lot of it for me, just, when I think about that macro aspect, it just comes down to the hiring aspect. And, I look at Kelsey here and, she's fantastic to have in League of Legends. And I know, for League, we're going to have a successful 2023 because, I've got Kelsey here and I trust in her and the vision she's going to bring to the organization and the staff and all that great stuff. So, for me, it's just, sitting at the top and, thinking about our titles from a great macro perspective and how we're going to advance them.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. I know, EG's planning world domination over the next couple decades, so we'll be around forever, based on the things that Andrew and Kelsey are doing. You both have kind of touched on it throughout the previous questions. I want to go into how has the LCS and League of Legends ecosystem changed throughout the years? I know you've both spent a lot of years specifically in like the LCS scene and then like overall in the esports scene in general. So I want to hear from both of you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about this question first, I really think of it from a GM perspective. And so I'm kind of thinking about different off seasons and how things have changed. When I first entered the league with Clutch Gaming, this was a probably more bottom performing team where, we actually looked at our analytics significantly because, we didn't have the dollars out there to acquire, what the data was telling us, the best players and all that. And so a much different Moneyball approach that I had to take, 2018, 2019. But, coming over to EG, where now we kind of have that capital to acquire the best players from a data perspective, that's really the evolution I have seen in the ecosystem, which kind of relates back to myself a little bit, actually. But I think you've seen ups and downs for the league in terms of spending, who are the top teams and whatnot. I think, for me, when I entered the league, at least, it was TL, C9, and TSM. And, no one ever thought about even touching them. How are you going to break through the old guard? And I think, the big evolution I've seen is, there are these teams like 100 Thieves and EG who are more new teams. They're able to break into that new guard. You have FlyQuest this year who's taken a jump up to attempt to be in top 3. So for me, I'm most happy to kind of see parity enter the league, and it's no longer probably as top heavy of the league as it was previously.
Yeah, definitely. Kelsey, what do you think?
Yeah, I think to add to that, obviously, from someone who spent most of my time kind of really focused on how do we bring up the next rung of talent, I think there's a lot more focus on looking kind of at players as they're coming up that has kind of like allowed for organizations like EG or 100 Thieves to get maybe some leverage in that regard, in terms of competitive viability. The biggest thing for me that's come up is just like this idea that every year there's this conversation and conflict between like competitive viability and like money spend, what is actually the issue. And so now we're seeing a lot more investment going into things like Champions Queue, like things that should impact the ecosystem on a smaller level rather than, or a longer term level rather than right now. And I think that has been a slight change. Even when you look at projects like TL, it's like, okay, now we have to think more introspectively about the process that we're using to choose our players, right? So I think that there's a lot more conversations about that element of it, and that's very interesting going forward because it feels like suddenly we're trying to catch up after 12 years or so of the game existing. So it's very interesting and fun to watch and be a part of.
Yeah, definitely. Andrew, you mentioned like EG has the capital to kind of bring in those big players, but we also do, and Kelsey talked about this too, we bring in the people who are going to grow into that role as well, which I think is incredibly unique. So we do the best of both worlds here. Kelsey also mentioned Champions Queue, like love Champions Queue. I saw Whooply was in the chat here, so that's another super exciting initiative. I do want to switch gears into LCS offseason. And for those of you who are watching, we will be taking questions from chat at the end. So if you have a question, go ahead and throw it there and we'll pull it, and then we can ask Andrew and Kelsey towards the end. So switching into LCS offseason, Andrew, one of the things you said during your last answer is that FlyQuest is attempting to make top 3. Do you think they'll actually end up top 3?
I do think they will end up top 3. I think they've done a great job in not only building the roster, but even constructing their staff as well. I think, when you bring over players from Korea who are new to the LCS, priority is making sure that they can assimilate into the region. And I think you've seen that from a staffing perspective, that they understand that as a requirement. So I'm actually pretty optimistic about FlyQuest and what they'll put together.
Yeah, super exciting. Talked a lot about big roster pickups. So for us, who was our biggest pickup, and why was it Kelsey Moser?
So Kelsey was definitely one of the biggest. I'm super happy with that, or else, it would have been me and Empire putting it together, which, we've done before, but it's so much easier when we have Kelsey here. Kelsey was integral for helping us put together this team for last year. And so to have her back putting together the team for 2023 with us is phenomenal, and I couldn't be more grateful. But really, besides from Kelsey, we got a lot of great people joining us. We have Galil in Academy, we have Freeze in LCS. Freeze is joining us from 100 Thieves, as well as FBI and Someday. And I think it's really awesome to see kind of a small group come from 100 Thieves. We've got a small group here from EG, and we're really trying to combine the best of both worlds there. And so, just so many great pickups across the board. And I think, it's fantastic to have Kelsey really at the helm of all that to ensure, there's cooperation and development between, Academy and LCS. And that's going to be a big focus for us this year. And, how are we able to properly utilize our Academy program to ensure LCS is thriving? So a lot of different initiatives that we're really shaking up with this new coaching staff. And, it's just going to be exciting to see how it develops.
Yeah, definitely. So you started touching on it there. I want to dive deeper into this. We have an entirely new coaching staff moving into 2023 year. What led up to the changes? And you talked about like supporting competition and supporting our initiatives across Academy as well as for the main LCS roster. How will those changes help us be set up for 2023 competition? And I want to hear from both of you on this one. Maybe Kelsey, we can start with you.
Yeah, so you're basically just asking like what were we looking for in the new coaching staff? Yeah, I think it's very important, especially someone like Freeze. It was a combination of basically having a conversation with him and realizing that he's ready to shake things up. He's ready to take on a lot of responsibility, and also just hearing testimonials from a lot of players he worked with, having been on 100 Thieves, and just hearing like Freeze is the guy. And often you find that a lot of coaches who are not like the immediate ones you think of as having all the titles or having led the charge or having been the big voices, often those coaches are can be pretty undervalued. So it's a lot about like having good conversations, like visiting recommendations. I tend to do very long interviews for coaching staff. We've done very long interviews for coaching staff in the past. We like to talk over the game. We like to ask specific questions about past teams, assess what they're thinking of when they're thinking of a draft landscape, or have them talk about how they would manage certain scenarios that have come up. So all of those things matter a lot. And for me, I think less about like finding specific qualities for a head coach and an assistant coach, or specific qualities for a head coach and a draft coach, or things like that, and more about people who have different types of personalities and strengths and weaknesses that fit well together. And I think that we have that in the staff that we've put together. I believe we haven't announced our assistant coach yet, but hopefully we can discuss that a bit more when we know the full staff. So,
yeah. Definitely.
I'm super glad I didn't say anything about that assistant coach, so thank you.
Yeah,
you did leak. I think you did leak something, but we'll let chat figure that out.
Okay, well, no more leaks here. Actually, I think that's like good for viewership. So maybe like we'll talk about it maybe later. I don't know. I don't have any questions about that. I will bring it up. Kelsey, I did have follow-up questions regarding like what you looked for in coaching staff. I know you touched on that. I'm also curious, you talked a lot about starting to get newer players or like up and coming talent. What about coaches who like, or people who want to grow into a coaching role? Like, how would you suggest people, start their career off if they're not like in the ecosystem already?
So yeah, this is a pretty pertinent topic, because this is something that I think like even Peter Dunn talked a lot about, the NA ecosystem not having a good pathway for coach development. I think one of the biggest things that you can do is basically putting yourself out there, like reaching out to people who, and I would say this about any field that you're in, right? Reach out to someone who's in a position that you're interested in being in and ask for feedback, but don't ask stupid questions like, how do I become like you? Because then they'll probably just ignore you. But ask like specifically, okay, I really liked the way that what you said in this interview, or I really liked basically your team's approach or how your team like functions in this position. And I'd be really curious to talk to you more about that, or to learn more about your insights and stuff like that. Because then it shows that you are specifically reaching out to that person for a reason, right? You're not just reaching out to them because they are a coach in a high lofty position, right? You specifically want to reach out to that person and have a conversation with them and ask for feedback. So I think also keep in mind that a lot of times when people say, well, I don't want to bother them, or I don't want to do, like, a lot of the time, people in these positions, yes, they're very busy, but they also, they like the ego stroke a bit, right? Like it's sometimes they're happy when you reach out to them. So like, yes, praise me more. So always think about that when you're reaching out to people, and always have something that you want to accomplish when you're talking to someone that you want feedback from. The other thing is I would say just like find ways to coach amateur players, work with amateur players, talk to them. I would definitely say like read books about coaching, like sports coaching, things like this, because I think a lot of mistakes that people make is thinking that coaching is just about like the on-stream coaching where you nitpick every little mistake that people make, but coaching is way more about how do I get the person to think in a certain way. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is not what people would think of as coaching. So make sure you're exploring a lot of different options and making yourself well-rounded instead of just only single-mindedly grinding your game knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think to jump in there, like on your last point, Kelsey, like that's really what I was speaking about, earlier when it comes down to personnel management. I think you can have a coach who's certainly super expert in the game. He studies it all day and all of that, but you can know he's probably going to be lacking in other qualities. And so to see a well-rounded coach, I think, that's really what we're looking for, and really what I want to see. And hopefully coaches kind of work on that and understand, while the game is incredibly important to understand and know, there are so many different other areas, whether it's, leadership, there's other areas of feedback loops and all that. There's so much that you can do to make yourself an asset to your players outside of the game. And that's what I would really stress to a lot of, coaches who may think game knowledge is the most important thing, but, it's just one of the sectors that is incredibly important.
Yeah, definitely. I want to follow up to that. So this panel is called "The Data Behind the League," and you talked a little bit about how coaching staff like works with players or game knowledge or how they approach the game differently. From an analytics perspective, I know that like EG prides itself on the way that we work with data and analytics. How do you adjust working with coaches who aren't used to looking at League of Legends like more in depth from like an analytics perspective?
Yeah, so I think to start things off, just about data. Data for me in any MOBA, whether it's League or Dota 2, it's supposed to tell you a story and more so validate a lot of your assumptions. When we talk about like the famous eye tests and all of that, that's actually somewhat of a data-driven approach, because you're thinking about, hey, this is my assumption of what should happen, and you can actually validate it with data. And so, for a lot of these coaches who haven't been exposed to it, that's kind of where I want to come in and talk to them about that aspect. It's, you actually are thinking about it, but you may have never seen the numbers behind it. And so to be able to have, a partner like HPE who can come in and help, validate and present some of those ideas with numbers, that's what's extremely helpful. And, it opens the coach's eyes to going, oh, hey, data is useful in a MOBA. How else can I better utilize this? And, what other assumptions can I validate with this data?
Yeah, definitely. Kelsey?
I think always starting with things that are talking points. So like a lot of times, some of the most productive coaching happens when you're having a discussion about something, right? So even if data points to something that a coach or a player thinks of as, no, that's not accurate. It's like, okay, well, why do you think it isn't? Because then they'll be forced to re-examine it, and sometimes the conclusion will be actually, maybe it is right, or maybe it is wrong. But using data to start those conversations and get players to think more critically and coaches to think more critically about like why the numbers are pointing to something that they think is bad is often very, very useful, and like basically stretches the creative mind a lot more. And then coaches begin to actively start thinking about things like, oh, how can we use these numbers in different ways? And as soon as you open that door, you basically have them for life. They're like, yes, analytics is great, So
Yeah, analytics is great. We appreciate it. We talked a lot about the coaching staff. I want to address the players. I know we have like some pretty huge pickups and a lot of offseason changes. The core of our LCS roster still remains the same as it was in 2022. Was the goal to build more pieces around like those starting three, JoJo, Inspired, and Vulcan?
Yeah, absolutely. For JoJo Inspired, I think this is the strongest mid jungle duo in the league. And then, for NA residents, you have Vulcan, who I believe is the strongest. I know Core is now a resident, but I'm always going to consider him an import slightly. And so, for me, Vulcan, he's been the strongest support in the league for a long time. And, was with me back at Clutch Gaming. So, really understanding a lot of his tendencies and what he wants to do. So, for those three, absolutely. And I think, really a lot of that was notated by, even contract structure going back into last year when you see all these contracts lining up to 2024. This is a group I really believe in. And, they love playing with each other. They love the culture we have created here. And so to be able to supplement that with the resources they need, that is my priority to ensure that they can keep performing at the highest level. And I think, players like FBI and Someday can absolutely accomplish that. And so, really to go into those two, for us this offseason, I don't want to sit here and say it was a pretty easy offseason, but, when looking at our scouting, it was extremely obvious, the pathways we were going to take and where we were going to go. And, that really started for us, probably back in September at this point. And, we had a clear direction idea of what we wanted to do and we executed on it. And so I am really happy with how the offseason went and the pieces we were able to acquire to really focus our core on, winning the LCS for next year. That is going to be our goal. And I think, we have the pieces to do so now.
Yeah, definitely. Kelsey?
Yeah, and I think I've had a lot of conversations also about like the conflict, like the alleged conflict between like winning and developing, because I think EG has proven that you can do both, right, at the same time. And I think one of those things that came up is there were definitely like development pieces that were attractive and things of that nature, but for us it was like right now we want to maintain momentum while bringing up the next pieces that are exciting to us in our ecosystem, right? So we're going to like pick out players that, based on our scouting, based on the numbers that we've put together on them, they look like the best options, right? As well as they complement the team core that we have already extremely well. And then begin like focusing our efforts on continuing to develop like the rising stars that will come like from generations year over year, and stay invested in basically the core plus like the pieces that we're adding and making sure that we're having success both in like the developmental space and in the championship space.
Yeah, definitely. So talked about the core. We hinted at the new players we're bringing in. We had two huge pickups for next year. What went into the addition of Someday and FBI?
Yeah, so I think, for us, and I kind of already spoke about it a little bit earlier, we began our scouting process pretty early in September, working throughout October on it and whatnot. And, for us, it really came down to, those are the top two choices. It was very apparent to us, and, we went for it immediately, and, it all came together. So, for us, when looking at Someday, this is going to be, another veteran player for us coming into the roster. But, I think there are differences between Someday and Impact, not only within game, but even out of game as well, that we sort of assessed and made assumptions about kind of what will happen this with this upcoming season and how it will progress our own players. So Someday's a player I'm really excited to work with and, see how he evolves a little bit of our culture. So that'll be exciting. And then, FBI has been a top performer in our league as an NA resident. This is a player who came over from the Oceania region. He came to NA, continued to improve in a region that a lot of imports come over here, and it's very hard for them to improve. And so to see him improve in this region is really phenomenal. And I know he's out there grinding in Korea right now with, one of the highest win rates out of all the NA players there. And so, seeing that just validates a lot of the assumptions I have about this player. And so, to pair him up with such a strong support like Vulcan, I think that's going to be really exciting. FBI is a player who's played with Huhi for, the majority of his career here in NA. And so I'm really excited to see him working with a different support, a support I probably value a lot higher, and really see where, FBI takes off in the bot lane.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone is super excited. EG is definitely going to be a top contender this year. Kelsey, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially bringing up FBI, because a lot of people, I think when I saw fan responses, like that was the piece they were most skeptical about, right? Of all the pieces, and I thought about this, and like how, because I did the scouting and I watched the gameplay footage, and he still performed extremely well this year, and so I was thinking like what was causing this, and like I realized that over time, the worst he's done in the years that he's competed in LCS is basically third team All Pro. That's like the worst he's done. If that's his floor, and we can give him like space, like a fresh start, support that he's going to like be able to focus on laning with, since he's a very laning focused player, things along that nature, then I think that we can see like the FBI go back to first team All Pro instead of third, right? If that's like the bandwidth that he's fluctuating between, and then of course like someday someone who like I'm familiar with, I know what his personality will be like, etc. And we talked a lot about, and I think this is something that's you asked the question earlier, like how the NA ecosystem has evolved over time. And I would say, like several years ago, like off-season conversations were, yes, the best performer according to Reddit. Like, I'm not going to name any team names, but it's like let's go, let's use the bag, let's secure this player and put it together, and not think about a lot of intangibles, not think about other environmental factors and things. And we had a lot of conversations about like what would these players' personalities be like, how can we best set up an environment for them and a culture for them to succeed. And so that went in heavily to it, to Andrew's points, as well as just like I feel like Someday has just always been one of the best top winners in the world, and people just like don't acknowledge it because he's playing NA for the past several years of his career. So it's really interesting to watch like the way he's playing fights, like the gameplay footage, and it was just kind of an eye-opening moment when I was going back and doing the scouting and realizing like, no, this guy is really good, So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. What kind of qualities and habits do you look for in players like when you're scouting them, and how does it change based on their age or role? Like if you're looking for an established veteran coming into a roster versus somebody who you want to kind of mold into the next rookie of the year.
Yeah, so I think to start things off, this can be a really tricky question, because it kind of depends on where you're starting from. Are you starting from scratch and you have to build something up fresh? Or, do you have a core, you understand the culture they have, their personalities and whatnot, and you're trying to supplement it from there on? And so, for me, when I'm scouting or looking at players, talking with them, I could sit here and say, I want every player like JoJo. But one, that won't happen, and two, that's probably a bad combination because for reasons. And so, when I'm thinking about these players, I really try to think about how is this player going to mesh and interact with his teammate, because for me, this job is very difficult for all of our players, all of our staff. When the high stress moments, you are working every single day. You do get a day off during the week, but most likely you're playing solo queue or doing something related to the game. And so you have to think about, how these people are going to socialize with each other for the entirety of the year in these 24/7 types of moments. Because, for me, normally the top three teams that are making it to Worlds are the teams that actually have the most successful culture. So that's why in this scouting process, looking at the intangibles, as Kelsey spoke about, is extremely important. I think that is what so many people actually discount when constructing a roster, a staff, or even an organization, a startup in general. All of this is kind of interconnected, and so it goes back to your hiring process and how that looks like. We could sit here and talk about scouting the in-game tangibles, but I think those out-of-game tangibles and how those are going to grow over time is actually probably where you get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, definitely. Kelsey, I want to hear from you on this too, but maybe I can focus it a little bit differently because I know Andrew covered a lot of things here. So, the out of game tangibles versus the in game tangibles. What kind of data kind of goes into those scouting decisions? I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. With HPE as our new data insights partner, they'll be helping us develop a deep dive into gameplay. How could this help impact or change scouting development as well as gameplay strategy?
We already have a pretty, I would say, like numbers driven process. As Andrew already pointed out, like the eye test, we're able to kind of assess like what is based on like a sample of VODs that we do, like what is the we're breaking down like what is good gameplay in terms of like small moments, or like I guess the way a player is playing a team fight, or the way that they're approaching their landing phase, and we're able to like find patterns and rate those patterns based on like information that we can perceive as like this would be the best solution and best decision in this moment. They didn't make that decision, but they made something close or something along those lines. And then so we're already kind of like cataloging and rating in like a data driven way, and then so using HP Insights will be able to give us like more precise methods of kind of like identifying that right over time as we continue to work with them and iterate on that. I think that will be extremely useful for us and take out a lot of the, because let's just put it this way, when during off season, like I go to bed seeing Summoner's Rift in the back of my eyeballs, so like
Is that a good thing?
it will also
No.
cut down on a lot of the time just watching the game like repetitively. And I feel like HP, if we're able to partner with them to like help use data insights to streamline the scouting process, then that will be extremely useful for us. And I'm looking forward to what that partnership will look like.
Do you think that that partnership and those insights tool will also help open up to like a newer generation of coaching staff or like supporting coaching roles who can like really grasp the new tools that are being built?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I've had to think about this a lot in terms of, because I used to be an analyst, and yes, I went to school and I studied like economics and statistics, but I hardly used that other than some of the statistical programming tools to do like that would do things faster than some other programs that I could have used. That was basically like what I used it for. I didn't. Most of my analysis was like very eye test based. So I think what we're seeing more and more is that analysts that are getting picked up are able to do more programming languages like Python, are able to use the API, are able to find these things and come out with like these really exciting tools like our friend Bayora, right, who works with the league team and EG is can give you like models of certain characteristics and behaviors, can give you like what happens like consistently out of base and patterns. We can give you positional data on the map and things like that. So as the analyst role especially is changing more and more, it used to be kind of like a progression of analyst into assistant coach into like head coach kind of deal. But I would say that pathway will probably change a lot, and we'll see a lot more of a demarcation between what is an analyst and what is a coach, and collaboration between those roles, and both of those roles being essential on a coaching staff in the future.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And yeah, Bayar is amazing. I remember coming into the Seattle office and he basically had an algorithm written on the biggest whiteboard we had possible. And that was how we were going to do our League of Legends analysis for this year. So pretty insane how things are evolving through the years. We talked about all the pieces that we're building around the LCS roster, the coaching staff, the assistant coaching staff, and the new players we picked up. What's the end goal for the 2023 LCS roster in both spring and summer, and how will HPE help better support EG to achieve that goal?
Yeah, I think speaking to our goals last year, the goals, it was kind of funny, our goal in spring was top 3, and then it was to win summer, and we got it backwards. So that was interesting, but I still was very excited of achieving our goals last year, making it to Worlds and all that. And so, for this next year, with this roster and new coaching staff coming in, really my expectation is to win both splits. I think we have the resources, we have the capability to do so. And how is HPE going to help with that? As we were going through that last question, I was just thinking about, the way our analytics tools have evolved over time. And it's actually very scary to think back to 2018 and, see where we are now. And I'm like, wow, we've got a lot of stuff now. And so, Biora has been an excellent addition to our staff. And so, ideally with him and, the introduction to HPE, I already know of a few tools that HPE is working on. And I think, they're ideas that I had so early on that I'm just excited to be able to utilize them now and start creating new assumptions about, our roster, the way the game is played, and just trying to go back to always, that year-over-year improvement. And that's how I'm envisioning, the HPE partnerships. It's going to allow us to improve more so over the year. And obviously, this question is focused on the short term, but there are tools being cooked up for spring that I think will get us there. But the tools are going to need a lot of work, and we're going to have to learn ourselves as a coaching staff how to utilize them properly. I think that's my expectation for HPE in spring. We're going to be working with them, learning how to use a lot of what they're trying to introduce for us. And then by summer, ideally, we have it kind of finalized and working super well, and we're going to be able to take home that trophy.
Yeah, definitely. I want to follow up on this too, and Kelsey, I want to hear from you on this. You both talked about like the evolution of analytics tools within the space over the course of like 3-4 years, maybe, and what HPE is building. Do you think like for analyst or coaching roles that those type of skills like Python or coding languages will become a necessity when looking for upcoming coaching staff or even existing ones?
So I don't think it's a requirement on the coaching, like, for head coach, assistant coach. I think as Kelsey spoke about, it kind of is what that assistant coach pathway is becoming, because once you have access to the API key and, you're using those coding languages, you can make a lot of great stuff. And it's stuff, when you spoke about the algorithm being written on the whiteboard, we can't do that on paper. We couldn't do that a couple of years ago or in Excel. Maybe you could have, but we didn't have the people who knew how to do it. But that I kind of go back to the point of on the analyst role, being able to manipulate data with Python, Java, whatever we want to call it, like that's where you're going to find so much potential. And I don't even think we've really scratched the surface of it, because a MOBA has way too many variables. There in League specifically, you're changing the patch almost every 2 weeks. And so, you're able to come up with these insights almost every other week potentially. There's just so much data to be discovered and dug up in League of Legends. That's why it's just going to be constantly evolving in the data kind of realm.
Yeah,
definitely. Kelsey?
Yeah, I think definitely a lot of these stuff it's becoming a requirement for the analyst role, right? I had a couple of conversations in off season with people who are analysts effectively, right? Where they do a lot of like analysis and they write down their prep notes in Google Sheets and all of these things, but they don't necessarily know how to use the API or they don't know how to use these things. So those people, since that used to be like a valid career field, that's like how I did it in 2018 when I was an analyst. And is basically like doing a lot of the like manual kind of math and analysis that way, and presenting like sheets and working a lot on presenting these nice looking presentations, because coaches and players don't look at things unless they're pretty. I'm guilty of that myself. So the fact of the matter is that role is kind of like becoming more and more outdated. Obviously, it's still nice if you can make things look pretty, but being able to do a lot of that work that took hours and hours and hours by hand, you can now do with API access and print things and output like results in an easy and digestible manner. So I think that that is becoming like more and more necessary for the analyst role. And then for the so those people, like, they can either learn those skills or they can think about learning more like soft skills, personality management, like learning how to articulate their game insights in a way that's useful for players to learn, and then go the coach route. So that's like kind of the crossroads that a lot of those people find themselves in, I think, with the evolution of how data and analytics work in League of Legends. So I'm not saying it's there now, but I think that more and more that's the direction that it's gonna take.
Yeah, definitely. Um, we have about 5 minutes before I want to get into audience questions, so we can come back to this. But I want to look ahead into the future a bit. So, looking at all the 2023 announced LCS rosters, who is the biggest competitor for EG?
For me, I spoke about FlyQuest, so I won't get into them. I think the other team that I'm thinking about is C9. And I really enjoyed actually listening to Jack and how he spoke about the roster, the decisions they made. Because one thing he spoke about was they're only changing one piece, and really believes in only changing out one, two, just keeping the core together. And that's a philosophy I've really tried to live by. But, for EG, we have been a new team in the LCS where C9's been here forever with that core and whatnot. And so I've, spent these first few years finding my core, finding who I believe in, what I want to build around. And now that I have that, we only changed out two pieces this year. And so, it's kind of cool to see a little bit of a similar philosophy between C9 and EG a little bit, I think, in that regard. So, back to the question, it's going to be FlyQuest and C9.
Interesting. Kelsey?
It's a really interesting question because there is no team in the LCS right now that I look at that I don't think, okay, there's definitely a risk here, right? So to Andrew's point earlier, like, we have a lot more parity in the league, so you can talk about a lot of different teams and options. Obviously, like, the question mark behind FlyQuest is like, how will a lot of those players like adjust to the environment that they're in, because there's a lot of times if a player hasn't played in NA before as an import, they have a hard time like adjusting to the environment, all of those things, and FlyQuest has definitely taken measures to help provide that transition, but that's always like the question mark that you have in that space. In terms of like C9, there's a lot of speculation and analysis that they were super good on the patch, so like, how is not changing anything going to impact long-term results? And then, of course, you have the 100 Thieves questions on Bjergsen and Doublelift having played like the legacies of their careers, and the bias, I think, that's becoming more and more kind of ridiculous, which is like, oh, they're old now, so they must be bad. But so that's why I kind of want to talk about 100 Thieves, because I think that people will be surprised by how good like the pieces of Lucio and Tenacity really are. I don't think people are prepared for those players to like already be like top 5 in their role, but I think they are. So I think that that's a team that's like kind of a dark horse competitor for us for sure, and a lot of it will hinge on kind of like how their mid and AD perform. But I have high hopes that they could make a top 3 spot, just the same as like C9 or FlyQuest might be able to do so.
Yeah, definitely. And we faced them in the finals during spring and in the semifinals during summer. Do you think that's the new rivalry in the LCS?
No, it should be a 3-0.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. So now that that's out of the way, off season is closed. What are you most looking forward to now with the roster and all the pieces around the roster?
I think for me, it's just taking a break, and now that off season's over, it's just getting ready for the start of next year. Because as I said earlier, when we're in LA and we're working, it's a 24/7 type of job. And so just making sure everyone is rested up and ready to hit the ground running, because we want to start off strong, and if we want to make MSI, we got to put in a lot of work. So that's really what I'm doing right now, and I'm just looking forward to next year.
Kelsey, how about you?
Yeah, I think working just a little bit on putting together with coaches in terms of like what the structure that they want in place for next year. I think a lot of that work is already done or in process of being done. And yeah, like Andrew, eventually you do have to take a break. Every once in a while, you realize you do. So it's nice to get a few days of rest and relaxation every once in a while, and then start setting that patch again. So good times.
Yeah, definitely. So I do want to start going into the audience questions. We have a couple so far, but for those of you watching currently, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in chat, and then we can ask it to Andrew and Kelsey. So the first one is from Thwick. For both of you, what are your goals for NACL?
Yeah, so I think for me, one of my personal goals has always been getting one of our players up from academy to the LCS every year, and so that is going to be a core goal of us. And then just on the game side, we're trying to obviously win. First place is always the goal, and so that is a goal for this squad. I think they are more than capable of doing so. We have strong players in each and every one of our positions, and then for us in particular, really taking a look at Soul and Shaden. These players are probably more new to competitive, and so really trying to ensure that their development is looked after and that we can help push them to the next level.
Yeah, definitely. Kelsey?
I think Andrew just leaked again, but
The chat says NACL leaks, so I don't know.
Yes, I think we're technically announcing our roster tomorrow. But in any case, I think for me, it's what goes into building a good NACL roster is very different, but also very similar to what goes into building a good LCS roster, because the personalities matter a lot, but the goal is going to be more developing, because no player is going to say like, yeah, my goal is to win an ACL. That's not what they want to achieve long term in their career. And if that is their long term goal, that's probably, I mean, I don't want to say we don't want to work with that player, but we would rather work with like more like driven, championship minded players who wants to go really, really, really far. So I think the goal is always like getting to a point where they are going to make it into LCS and making it long term. And for me, like a lot of that has to do with setting up a good environment for them to succeed. So once you know that there are pieces that you're really excited about building around, I think, for example, like JoJo was one of them for the team in 2021. Was one of the pieces that they're very excited about building around an academy. It's like, okay, how do we start building equally exciting pieces, or pieces that will really, really help JoJo get to that point, while also focusing on their goals? Because I really hate the stigma that like players who have played academy or NACL before. I think I never, all the players who, I really hate, sorry, starting over. I really hate the stigma that players who have played academy or what is becoming NACL before basically are like washed up, or they've been around too long or anything like that, because those players can sometimes be very driven. I think Dokla for CLG, for example, proved that you can make that comeback and be a very, very strong competitor within the league if you've learned a lot about the ecosystem and learned a lot about like how to apply yourself, and found better training methods that work for you. And no piece on our academy roster will just be like a stand-in piece. Like all of those pieces are players that we will believe in to be able to complement each other and make it far. But it's always nice to have a mix of experience of, players who have competed before, who can set the tone, who can set the culture, and players who are new and learning and are going to push the boundaries and keep the hunger alive. So
Yeah, definitely. You talked a little bit about the development ecosystem. This next question from Sir Desi: do you foresee a future where League of Legends and other esports have like a specific collegiate to professional, or maybe even pre-collegiate, like high school, collegiate, professional pipeline, similar to traditional sports? I know there's a lot of pieces that are being built around that currently, but maybe something like more developed that resembles that traditional sports pipeline.
this is like very close to a lot of my thoughts, and Some of the opportunities that I'm excited about for EG going into 2023 is really talking about that pipeline and how we can level it up in terms of making sure that players, like skilled players, make it to LCS or things like this. I think we've been, like I said, we've been really age biased in the ecosystem to the point where people think if you're college age and you haven't been scouted already, your career is over. You know, you're not going to make it pro. So, but I think we're kind of killing a lot of opportunities for a more limited talent pool because in NA we do have a way more limited talent pool. Like in South Korea or China, you can use like somewhat arbitrary reasons to disclude players because it's like, yes, there is a 16-year-old who's probably better than this 21-year-old somewhere, you know, who will have a longer career, so we should pick up this guy, you know. But in NA, we need to think about like what pathways or how can we build out the pipeline so that more players will be incentivized to follow the role of competitive play. Player that includes like a collegiate ecosystem that can provide educational opportunities for players who are good at the game. That will encourage more people to take League of Legends as a pro sport, take it very seriously the way that they do college football or the way that they do basically any college sport, basketball, baseball, etc. So I think that's the way that I think it needs to go, because otherwise the only way you can afford to go pro in North America is if you are convincing your parents to take a gap year and support you while you play video games all day, right? Which is just like not going to happen and really, really limits opportunities for kids and also for organizations to want to invest in talent.
Yeah, definitely. We have a few more minutes left and then a few more questions as well. These ones are more fun. From the LIVEEVIL pod, Kelsey, what was your first impression when you met JoJo, Inspired, and Vulcan?
So technically, I met all of them a year ago, earliest, right? Because they were all in the facility, and I was still at EG when I made the job change. So I would say my first impression of JoJo was that that he was like he was very engaged and very excited about League, but you know was also very young, and I think like needed like a good structured environment to kind of channel that excited energy. And I think that he's still very much like that same excited, enthusiastic kid. And then basically that's like my first impression of JoJo. My first impression of Inspired was actually the first time I met Inspired. There was a planned like workout for the players, and I managed to go along with that one. And he and Vulcan like were breezing through it, you know. Like these are my first impression of him was like, okay, he's got it together. He's very young, but he believes in structure. He believes in finding like optimizations that are going to make him a better player. And he has like a very fixed way of looking at the game already, despite being a young player. So that was like kind of my first impression of Inspired. And in terms of Vulcan, my first impression of him was actually I met him to kind of like talk about the roster going into 2022, and he was very reasonable, very articulate, like asked very thoughtful questions, and I thought, okay, this guy is going to be thoughtful, like bring some consideration, maybe balance out like a bit of JoJo's excitement, and hopefully the entire roster will like utilize him well from that perspective, and have good personality meshes. So that was kind of my first initial impressions of all three of them.
Yeah, that's definitely sounds like a lot of JoJo, Inspired, and Vulcan. So we have 2 more minutes. 2 fun questions. First one for both of you. What's the best and worst moves of this LCS free agency?
So best one for me, I think, is, and this is excluding us, but best for me is going to be Impact to FlyQuest. Without that move, that roster does not come together. Impact is going to be the bridge between everything. So I think, that is a phenomenal move, really well calculated, excellent. So I applaud them for that one. And then in terms of like worst move, I don't know if I like in particular have a worst move. I think there are some very questionable moves, and that's probably how I'm looking at it. And so, for me, I kind of look at the GGS roster, which, I think it's like tradition to flame them and put them in 10th place. I don't think they'll be 10th place. But, I just think the roster construction of it doesn't necessarily make sense to me with the coaching staff. And so I'm very curious to see how that develops and what they do over there, because historically, actually, GG has always kind of overperformed because, as I said, everyone memes them as 10th place. But they always do really well, and I'm super confident in their coaching staff. So I'm just kind of curious how it really shakes up this year, because they've always done well. They have Gory coming over, and so I am just interested in seeing how it shakes up.
Interesting. Kelsey, how about you?
I guess the impact of FlyQuest 1 is very easy to highlight, right? I guess the best move of the offseason otherwise for me, I'm just going to stick to my academy roots and go with like the player promotions. I think like the clearly top performers in academy getting an opportunity in LCS, and the likes of like TL's Jan, Harry, but especially the 100 Thieves promotions. I think Lucio and Tenacity, like I said, people will be very surprised by how good they are. So I'm gonna go with those. Gotta stay on brand for me, The in terms of the worst, I don't know. I feel like Andrew had a very diplomatic way of answering the question, and I feel like I also have to be very diplomatic. But
we don't have to be diplomatic here. You can. He also said that we were going to 3-0 100 Thieves in semifinals or finals. So
yeah. So I have to I just don't think that there's any other answer than Gory, because to me that one is just so surprising. I think because Gory has a very interesting and storied career, and I'll be very surprised if he does extremely well in LCS, and maybe he will, because his signature is like picking Corki and scale and doing absolutely nothing in the laning phase and scaling. So maybe he'll do extremely well. But I feel like if he does do extremely well, then the rest of LCS has to step up their game. Either that or like you said, Golden Guardians does have a very phenomenal coaching staff. I have a lot of respect for the coaches that they have there, and have talked to a lot of them. So maybe they will unlock Corey's potential, right? So that's what I've got here, and I wish Corey the best of luck and hope he proves me wrong. Just hopefully not against us.
Nice. Well, thank you. One more quick question: with JoJo winning Rookie of the Year as well as getting fined during Worlds during the play-in stage, is it required for you both to wear Crocs in the office next year?
I hate Crocs. I can't stand that fashion, so that won't be me. I won't be wearing them.
Okay. Kelsey?
I have I don't really fit the stereotype of a large shoe collection. I have basically 4 pairs of shoes, and I don't own Crocs, and I haven't bought a new pair of shoes in 3 years, so I don't think I'm going to be wearing Crocs. It's unlikely.
Okay, sounds good. That's not the not the area that I thought that was going, but sounds good. So JoJo will just keep rocking them, and hopefully won't get fines for them anymore. That's all the time we have. Andrew, Kelsey, where can everyone find you on social media?
You can follow me on Twitter, Andy with 3 Ys Barton. So that's my Twitter. It's really the only social media I stay pretty active on. So there you have it.
And Kelsey?
Yes, same. I stay pretty active on Twitter. I probably won't be doing much with my YouTube or my Twitch this year, just because I want to stay fully focused on EG and the league's performance and everything else that we're working on. So mostly just follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/KARONMOSER. My middle name is Aaron. I get that question a lot. ARON. So that's why it's like that.
I did not know that. Maybe that could be a question for another panel then, but that's super interesting. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and thank you for joining us for this iteration of Genius League Smart Bytes powered by HPE with guests Andrew and Kelsey. I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation and be on the lookout for more conversations like this in 2023. So, yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.